What's up, everyone? Thanks for coming to check out this new video. This is one that I've been wanting to do for a while now. It might end up being a bit polarizing because of some of the views, but I felt like it was something cool to talk about because I feel like collecting, us as collectors, it encompasses so many lines over such a long period of time, but no one can really say like where it started and things like that, and everyone kind of has a different story. But I wanted to give my take on where I feel that modern day collecting originated. And I feel that it originated with 3 lines, and I'm gonna get into those. So keep on watching. We're gonna get into these lines. I'm gonna give you my 2 cents on where I think modern day collecting originated. So before I get into this first line, figure, what have you, I just want to kind of preface that, yes, while, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I had lines like G.I. Joe and Star Wars and He-Man, it wasn't, because I was young, I wasn't a collector. Like, yes, as a kid, you want everything. So it's like, I guess you can call it a collector, but I think of being a collector when you have like, the rational thought of spending money and buying things for the collecting purpose, not just being a kid just wanting more toys to play with. Now, I know that some who were older than me, when they were into G.I. Joe, they liked kind of like the 82 to 85 line more than like, say, the 86 on. So for them, the older crowd, maybe collecting did start with them, but I'm going to focus on someone my age. I'm 42, born in 82. I got the best of both worlds. I got the 80s and the 90s. But while I had a bunch of toys growing up, I didn't really become a collector until like the mid 90s, when you can, like I said, you have those thoughts of actually like focusing on collecting. So I was collecting comic books at the time. I had toys, but these 3 lines that I'm going to get into are what really kind of spawned, no pun intended, the modern day collecting that grew into what we all do now. And the first one I want to talk about is Todd McFarlane's Spawn. This was his first line of figures. This came out in 1994. I believe Spawn came out in 92 or 93, and it took fire. Spawn #1 was like, it started like kind of like the speculation boom with comics. We were all collecting comics. Comics was big, but then like the early 90s, when like they left Marvel, he went, with, the other guys, formed Image. Spawn came out. I think it's one of the highest selling independent comics. It's definitely not the highest. I think, unfortunately, that belongs to like Rob Liefeld or something. But, Spawn took off. I remember, getting that issue, and like at the time, that issue was like a $20 issue, like on the secondary market, which was a lot of money back then. But Spawn, the craze of Spawn was wild, and Todd did a really smart move, and he said, I want to do more than just comics. I want to go into more things. And he came out with this line, and this is the first Spawn figure that came out. And I remember I had gotten this figure. The cool part was my stepmom's father, he had rented out space to Todd's company, and that's where the first Todd McFarlane Toys was, at the space that was rented out from my stepmom's father. And he knew that, my grandfather, he knew that I was into comics and stuff like that. So he was telling me about this, and I said, I know what Spawn is. So he ended up bringing home a bunch of the figures for me that they gave him. And then he ended up getting me, a tour of the warehouse, the office space, what have you. So that was kind of cool. So I loved the Spawn line immediately. But because of like the comic craze and that speculation, like this was one of those first toys that like, was like, it piggybacked off of that. Before that, toys were just kind of for kids. You go to KB and Toys R Us and you bought the toys that came out. But this was like a collector's line because collectors collected the comic. And we were older, this was 94, 94. And it was just cool because it was like, he was doing stuff that you kind of hadn't seen before. The figure came with this this movable, it's like a living hinge on the PVC cape, and he had the chains on him. It was just cool. It came with a comic. Like, this was just an awesome figure, you know? So it makes sense that this figure really kind of like really started that collector boom, you know? And now look at today, what McFarlane has done. You know, look at after this, how his toy line had just evolved and where it is today. Look, he's running, you know, DC. DC's selling a ton. He's just doing a ton of product. And look, Spawn the comic is still out today. So it really shows the, you know, how he was able to keep this going. And, you know, he kind of took that collector rocket ship and just took off with it. So the Spawn line, to Todd's credit, definitely started it. You know, in my opinion, like I said, for modern day collecting, this figure is really important. That's why I have it in my collection, because it's really important to see, like, you know, where toy collecting, you know, originated from and evolved from. And to me, this you know, the Spawn line is the originator of it. So maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but we'll see. But that's kind of just my opinion. So here's where it started, and let's get on to the next one in the run here. You guys are no stranger to Star Wars Power of the Force 2. Kenner put this out in 1995, and I remember, I think, seeing this in toy magazines and then seeing it when it was on shelves. Like, this was such an amazing line, and to me, this was like where my collecting collecting massively took off. You know, I wanted every single figure. I had them lining shelves in my wall, but this was it. This Power of the Force 2. It was very smart by Kenner. I think Kenner was owned by Tonka at the time, to kind of do this. You know, I had vintage Star Wars figures, and it was cool, like, going to toy shows, buying vintage Star Wars figures. You know, the craze wasn't what it was yet, you know, because it was only, you know, less than 10 years removed. You know, seeing something modern come out was pretty amazing, you know, because they did things that, you know, figures that weren't in the original line, like Dagobah Luke, you know, and then you had an update of Boba Fett, you know, but it's like Darth Vader. It's like, I know people give, you know, a lot of flack to this line because of the muscular bodies, but like Vader just looked menacing, you know. And even that first Stormtrooper, I'm looking at him on the back of the package here. The first Stormtrooper was great. He wasn't too muscular. Yeah, Han and Luke and Vader, okay, you know, Leia. But like that first Obi-Wan was amazing, because it was like they got rid of the vinyl capes. We had like PVC secondaries. Like, it looked great. This was an awesome, awesome line. And then because it got so popular so fast, like, they went really deep with it. You know, this line, you guys know, just took off. So for me, it gave me a chance to collect Star Wars from the start when I missed it, you know, with the vintage collection. So I was all in day one, you know. And then it's like, even this line evolved into so much more. You know, they went from the, you know, the orange cars, and they did the freeze frames, and then I'm trying to think if the flashback ones were before or after episode 1, but this all led up to episode 1 in 99, you know? So for 4 years, I was like collecting this line hardcore. Episode 1 came out. I was in line at Toys R Us at midnight. I was the first person in line. I waited there for like 4 or 5 hours. My friends thought I was crazy, but I was the first person in a Toys R Us to go get those episode 1 figures. And that was so cool. Like, I could still vividly remember that experience of going in there and getting those. And that was just collecting, man. Like, and you know, I was there, and I was 99, I was 17. You know, I was there with guys in their 30s and 40s, you know, who were hardcore collectors also, but, you know, they've been collectors for a longer period of time. But for me, like, this was something new and cool to experience that. You know, it's unfortunate that stuff like that doesn't happen anymore. You know, that was a really cool moment in like my collecting history. But Power of the Force 2 is incredibly important, you know. And then like Power of the Force 2, just, you know, I know like people are like, oh, well, you can get these figures for like $2 and $3. I think that's great, because I can go to shows and fill in some gaps with some of these figures, and they're still great figures. But it evolved into past episode 1. Then you got, you know, Power of the Jedi, which was still a great line. And then I got out of after Power of the Jedi, I got out of it because then it got into, I don't know, and I'm probably wrong, Legacy Collection, Vintage Collection, all sorts of other stuff. And thousands of figures have been made. But look, just like Spawn, where McFarlane did that Spawn figure and it has managed to survive over time and continue to come out till today, you know, this Star Wars line just evolved into other things and still came out. Now, this is probably going to get a few of you upset, but you know, I'm just kind of stating the facts. Take a line like G.I. Joe. It's my all-time favorite line ever. Even that line could not continue to exist the whole time. G.I. Joe came, went away, would come back, go away, would come back as something new, then go away, then come back. There were always like lulls and gaps. Same thing with He-Man. Star Wars, even McFarlane has managed to keep coming out year after year. Star Wars never, ever stopped. And it never really changed like in drastic ways, where in G.I. Joe you had, you know, Sigma 6, the small figures, and then the big figures, and, you know, Sergeant Savage, and things were always changing with G.I. Joe. Star Wars kind of kept the same model. Yes, they had better quality figures with Legacy and Vintage Collection, with Articulation and soft goods, but, you know, your figures are always going to be able to live with each other. It always survived in that way. So that's why I think Star Wars transcends, like, you know, all toys, because of what it has been able to do for as long a period of time. It wasn't until, geez, what was that, 2015 when Black Series came out and changed the scale, you know? But even still, they were still putting out 3 3/4/4 inch figures. So, man, Star Wars is an absolute, you know, mammoth in toy collecting. But Power of the Force 2, incredibly important in modern day collecting. So that's why it's number 2 on my list. This is where it took off. This right here, this Spiderman Classics, spawned one of the longest selling lines in toy history. You know, even Star Wars changed names and things like that. And I know this was Spider-Man Classics. But you look at Marvel Legends and where they are today, and it's all because of this figure, this run. Toy Biz put out Spider-Man Classics in the year 2000. And I remember being in art school and seeing this in either Toy Fair or Tomarts, one of those toy magazines back when we, you know, looked at magazines and saw cool toys, didn't have the internet. But I remember seeing this and thinking, like, what is that? And a friend in our class, he was working at a comic shop, and he told us, like, hey guys, we're getting a bunch of cases in these in. And I said, I need that whole first wave. And the first wave was Spider-Man, it was Venom, it was Black Costume Spider-Man, and like that Man Spider, which was an odd choice. But again, these came out, and I remember he brought them into class, like he brought the case in for me. And I think it was like all my money, all the money I had at the time. But I wanted these so bad because I just thought they just looked so cool. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before. They were doing stuff at Toy Biz there that no one ever saw. Like, they were doing the same kind of format as the McFarlane Spawn figures, you know, the figure with comic. But you look at this figure and the articulation and the deco. Toy Biz just, they were like John Hammond. They spared no expense. They were putting, you know, they had toe articulation. They were the, you know, this was the originator of double elbows, double knees. You know, they had the double neck ball here, which is kind of crazy that this figure from 2000, you know, had all this articulation. I think the only thing that they didn't have that, you know, modern figures have is like the bicep swivel, but they did have a forearm swivel here. But I took this thing out. I didn't do any work in class that day. I was just playing with these figures at my desk because they were just amazing. You know, they took McFarlane Spider-Man. I could put him in tons of like crazy poses. Now, you know, this figure's 24 years old, so he's, you know, really loose and stuff. But still, that's nothing against the line. I mean, you know, the funny thing is with this is that they were pinless. And, you know, looking back on it, it's like I totally forgot that they were pinless. Now, they're pinless for a very specific reason, though, because the arms and legs were 2-part sonic welded ABS. So there would be, you know, it traps the joint, so there's no pin. Once they started making arms and legs in PVC, that's when you started getting the, you know, the insert pins. But it's kind of crazy that we think of pinless as so modern now, and, you know, it evolved from, you know, the first, you know, double elbows, double knees, but the originator of the double elbows and double knees were pinless. Now, you know, I think about this line all the time, you know, because, you know, when I think about my toy career and what I want to accomplish, I would love to one day come up with a new joint. Like, I feel like that's something that would just be cool to do. Say like, oh yeah, that's you know, and then like, oh, that's the Valiverse joint, you know. Toy Biz, I'm pretty sure they created the double elbows and double knees. I don't believe it was ever done. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe it was done on an import figure or something like that, but they did it. Now, I would love to know the history of who actually came up with this. I'm sure it's kind of one of those things where there's 4 guys that say, you know, oh, I came up with it. Oh, that was my idea. You know, you watch The Toys That Made Us and you see the He-Man video, and it's like 4 different guys came up with He-Man. So I'm curious to see who came up with this, because the double elbow and double knees totally changed action figures. You know, and it survived for, you know, we're 24 years later and we're still using that joint. Now, you know, I don't think that joints always have to change and evolve, because when you have something that's perfect, it's perfect. You know, some import companies have slightly altered the double elbows and double knees, but for as a whole, it's lasted. It's on my figures. It's on Legends still today. You know, although they're kind of phasing it out. Black Series kind of phased it out. So that's funny that they're going backwards. But this figure was just so ahead of its time. You know, maybe not ahead of its time. Maybe it just started, you know, this is what started the evolution of figures. You know, and it's like, yeah, they're a little smaller. I bet this figure doesn't stand well next to a current, you know, Marvel Legend. But man, like, just seeing it, like, to me, this figure can live on my shelf and not look out of place. So yeah, and then Toy Biz, we all know Toy Biz kind of just took off from there. You know, they rebranded it Legends after that. They came out with the Avengers and X-Men and things like that. So it was Spiderman Classics to start, and then it turned into Marvel Legends. And now Legends is still running today. I know Legends kind of went away for a little bit when, you know, Hasbro took over. And when Hasbro took over, the Legends that they put out were still molds that Toy Biz did, that they just gave to Hasbro. So they were putting out figures that they hadn't planned. It was Toy Biz plan. They figured, oh, we got the tooling. All right, let's just do it. Then Legends went away for a little bit. They brought out the, you know, the Marvel Universe line. And then a few years later, they brought Legends back. You know, they brought back Thor was in that hammer for San Diego Comic-Con. It's the return of Marvel Legends. So it was like, I guess you could say it hasn't been, you know, a full run since the year 2000. There was a gap in there. But look at the longevity of Legends, and look at the absolute amount of figures they've put out. You know, the only one that rivals it is Star Wars. You know, but Star Wars has had multiple different segments. But as far as Legends, man, I would love to know how many Legends figures under the Legends banner were put out. And it's like, I kind of consider this Legends because it's where it started. You know, the figure didn't really change when they started rebranding it Legends. But this is it, man. This is what collecting's about. You know, these 3 lines that I talked about, especially culminating with this line here, is what made modern day collecting. So I know, again, I'll say it. People are like, oh, I collected G.I. Joe and He-Man. Like, that was collecting for me. I get it. But to me, back then I was just a kid. I was just a little kid playing with toys, and I just wanted more toys. Collecting, like the idea of collecting, you know, when I can understand what collecting was, it started with these 3 lines, you know, and it just took off from there, because I haven't stopped collecting since then. You know, these really made it to the point where I wanted volume, and I wanted more of stuff and everything. Like I said, I saw this and I said, I need the whole wave. You know, they were just so cool. So, you know, even like looking back at this crazy packaging. I mean, it took forever. I had to get an X-Acto knife, probably cut myself trying to rip these out. It was kind of crazy, these packages. We couldn't do this nowadays. This would be incredibly expensive. But You know, and look, you know, we're doing, you know, throwback stuff, like all the retro stuff that's happening now, and going back to, you know, Hasbro went back to, you know, the early Legends packaging for some throwback things, and that's really cool that you can kind of celebrate that. But, you know, I hope you guys enjoyed like my take on modern collecting, kind of where it started, how it evolved from there, and these three influential lines that really took collecting from, you know, not really being something, or being something that was done based on kid lines, to becoming adult or you know, teen to adult focused collecting. So can't wait to hear what you guys think in the comments below. I want to see what your experiences were, what your thoughts were, things like that. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out our other content. You know, really happy with where the channel is going right now. We have tons of good content that came before this. If you guys are just finding this channel for the first time, go check out our old content, because we got some really great stuff in there. And we'll see you on the next one.